When a body goes into open water and stays there for 2 days, it does not just sit still. Currents move it. Tides pull it. Wind pushes it across the surface. That is not speculation, that is basic oceanography. The same science search and rescue teams around the world use every single day to predict where a missing person in the water is likely to end up. So when Nolan Wells' body was finally recovered off Horn Island, investigators, and now his own family's legal team, noticed something that should not have happened. He was found in essentially the exact same spot where he was last seen alive, not miles away, not carried off by a current the way 2 days in open water should have carried him. Attorney Ben Crump has now confirmed his team is working directly with oceanic engineering experts, specifically to answer one question: how and why did that happen? Because if the water tells a different story than the one currently being told about Nolan's final hours, that is not a small detail. That could be the detail that changes everything. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what oceanic engineering actually measures, why this specific detail has caught the attention of experts, and what it could mean for a case already this many weeks deep into unanswered questions. Before we go further, if you are new here, this channel breaks down real documented cases, using real sources, no speculation dressed up as fact. Subscribe to True Crime Revealed so you do not miss where this case goes next. Let us start with exactly what was said, and by whom, because this detail did not come from an anonymous online theory. It came directly from attorney Ben Crump, speaking publicly at the National Urban League's annual conference in Nashville, where he provided an update on his legal team's independent investigation into Nolan's death. Crump confirmed that his team is currently working with oceanic engineering experts specifically to examine how and why Nolan's body was found in essentially the same location where he was last seen alive. That is a specific, deliberate area of scientific investigation, one being pursued directly by the family's own legal team, not simply speculation circulating online. Attorney Eric Hertz continues leading that broader independent investigation, and this oceanic analysis represents one specific thread within it. To understand why this detail matters, we need to briefly explain what oceanic engineering and forensic hydrology actually involve, because this is not a vague or mystical field of study. It is a well-established, scientifically grounded discipline, one used regularly by the Coast Guard, by search and rescue teams, and by forensic investigators around the world, specifically to model how bodies move through water over time. These models take into account tidal cycles, current strength and direction, wind conditions, water temperature, and even the specific way a human body behaves once it enters the water, all of it fed into calculations that can estimate, with a meaningful degree of accuracy, where a body is likely to travel over a given period of time. This is not guesswork. It is the same basic science that helps rescue teams narrow search areas for missing swimmers or boaters, and the same science medical examiners and forensic investigators sometimes use after the fact, working backward from where a body was recovered to determine whether that location is actually consistent with where and when that person is believed to have entered the water. That backward-looking analysis is exactly what appears to be happening here. If Nolan entered the water near Horn Island on the afternoon or evening of July 4th, and his body was not recovered until July 6th, 2 full days later, then basic oceanic movement, tidal cycles alone, moving in and out multiple times over that period, would ordinarily be expected to shift a body at least some meaningful distance from its original entry point. The fact that his body was instead found in essentially the same location where he was last seen is the specific anomaly Crump's team is now asking oceanic engineering experts to formally examine and explain. It is important, and genuinely responsible, to walk through the range of explanations that could account for this, rather than jumping toward the most dramatic one available. There are entirely natural, non-suspicious explanations that oceanic engineers will need to rule in or rule out before any conclusion can be drawn. Underwater topography, sandbars, submerged debris, or shallow pockets near the shoreline can sometimes trap or hold a body in place, preventing the kind of drift that would otherwise be expected in open water. Localized eddies, small circular currents that behave differently from the broader tidal pattern in an area, can also sometimes hold an object relatively stationary rather than carrying it away. Wind direction working directly against the tidal current can, in some circumstances, effectively cancel out significant net movement over a period of days. Any of these factors, individually or combined, could potentially explain why a body remained in roughly the same area despite 2 full days elapsing, without requiring any change to the current understanding of how Nolan ended up in the water in the first place. At the same time, it is worth being honest about why Crump's team believes this specific question is worth the time, expense, and expertise of bringing in specialized oceanic engineers in the first place. If none of those natural explanations sufficiently account for the body's location, that raises a different, more significant possibility: that Nolan either did not drift the way open water conditions in that specific area would typically produce, or that something about the timeline currently understood, exactly when and where he entered the water, may not be fully accurate. Neither of those possibilities is proof of anything specific on its own, but both would represent genuinely significant findings, precisely the kind of forensic detail capable of either reinforcing the currently accepted account of Nolan's death or meaningfully challenging it. This detail does not exist in isolation. It connects directly to a broader scientific debate already playing out publicly around this case. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, speaking to News Nation, has offered her own professional assessment based on the evidence currently available, stating that when you add everything together, what the public currently knows about this case points toward an accident, rather than foul play. Her assessment specifically cited a review of surveillance footage, witness accounts, Coast Guard communications, and the riptide conditions present in that specific area of the Mississippi coast that day. According to her analysis, those riptide conditions alone could meaningfully explain how a strong, healthy 18-year-old ended up unable to make it back to shore, without requiring any other explanation. It is worth noting that approximately 60 witnesses have now been formally interviewed as part of this broader investigation, a substantial number that reflects just how thoroughly investigators have worked to reconstruct Nolan's final hours from every possible angle. Coffindaffer's assessment also directly touched on a discrepancy we have covered in earlier updates on this case: the conflicting accounts of what Nolan actually said before his friends left the island. She addressed this directly, stating that in her professional view, this may be more of a timing issue than an indication that either side is being untruthful, suggesting both accounts could genuinely be accurate, simply describing different moments or conversations happening in sequence, rather than two competing, contradictory versions of a single exchange. This is a notably measured, careful framing from someone with direct investigative experience, and it stands in contrast to a lot of the more definitive, adversarial theories that have circulated publicly throughout this case. It is also worth updating something significant that has developed just in the past several days. According to reporting, the official state autopsy has now been completed. However, the results remain sealed and are expected to stay that way until they are formally presented to the grand jury that will ultimately determine whether any charges are warranted in connection with Nolan's death. This is directly relevant to the oceanic engineering thread we are discussing today, because it means the actual forensic and medical findings about how Nolan died, information that could either support or directly complicate the oceanic drift analysis currently underway, remain officially unavailable to the public, to Nolan's own family beyond what has already been shared, and, notably, even to the very engineering experts currently working to model his body's movement through the water. In other words, this oceanic investigation is currently proceeding without access to what may ultimately be the single most important piece of forensic information in the entire case: the completed, but still sealed, official autopsy findings. There have been additional developments connected to the broader forensic picture as well. An attorney for the Wells family confirmed that independent audio engineers have been brought in specifically to review a distress call made from a boat on the day of Nolan's disappearance, a recording released publicly by Mississippi authorities. That call was made to a private marine towing company, requesting assistance, and has become the subject of significant online speculation, including disputed claims about background audio some believe can be heard within it. This detail matters here because it reflects the same broader pattern running through this entire investigation right now. Multiple independent scientific and technical experts, oceanic engineers, audio engineers, all being brought in separately to examine specific pieces of physical or recorded evidence, attempting to extract objective, verifiable information from data that cannot lie, misremember, or change its account under pressure, in a case that has otherwise been shaped so heavily by disputed and sometimes contradictory human testimony. There is also a report, still developing as of this recording, that the identity of the young woman Nolan was reportedly last seen with, a detail we covered extensively in an earlier update, has now reportedly been identified publicly. According to that same reporting, a family member of that young woman has pushed back directly against certain claims connected to this case, specifically denying suggestions that Nolan was not ready or willing to leave the island with the group, and maintaining instead that he was, in fact, prepared to leave when his friends did. This directly connects to Coffindaffer's own analysis. Her suggestion that these seemingly conflicting accounts may reflect a timing issue rather than a genuine factual contradiction between witnesses. So, bringing this together, what does the oceanic engineering thread actually represent within this much larger, continuously evolving case? It represents an attempt to answer one of the more scientifically precise, potentially case-defining questions still remaining, using hard data rather than human recollection. If oceanic engineers conclude that Nolan's body remaining in essentially the same location is fully explainable through natural factors, local topography, wind conditions, minor eddies working against the tide, that finding would meaningfully reinforce the currently understood account of an accidental drowning, adding independent, scientific weight to the theory investigators and experts like Jennifer Coffindaffer have already publicly suggested. If, on the other hand, oceanic engineers determine that natural drift patterns cannot adequately explain what was observed, that finding would represent one of the most significant developments in this entire case, a piece of hard physical evidence suggesting the currently understood timeline, or account, of Nolan's final hours may not be complete. Either outcome would represent real, meaningful progress in a case that has, for weeks now, been defined largely by uncertainty, disputed witness accounts, and information that remains sealed pending grand jury review. That is precisely why this specific thread deserves real attention right now, not because it promises a dramatic, definitive answer on its own, but because it represents exactly the kind of independent, physical, hard-to-dispute evidence this entire case has been missing since the very beginning. We will continue following this case as the oceanic engineering analysis is completed, as the sealed autopsy results eventually make their way to the grand jury, and as the independent audio review of the distress call concludes. We will bring you those developments the moment they are verified, and not before. That is everything we have for you on this update. If you want to understand this case through actual evidence and expert analysis, rather than online speculation, make sure you are subscribed to True Crime Revealed so you do not miss what comes next. Drop a like if you believe hard science, not just witness testimony, deserves to lead this investigation forward, and let us know in the comments what you think this oceanic analysis will ultimately reveal. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next update.